crisp mountain air stung my lungs as I trudged up the dusty path towards the village square. It was my first week as the new curator at the Elmwood Museum, a quaint little establishment nestled in the heart of this forgotten corner of the world. This wasn't exactly the bustling museum scene I'd envisioned fresh out of grad school, but the tranquility had its charm. The village itself was a postcard come to life. A cluster of weathered wooden houses nestled around a quaint central square dominated by a towering oak tree. Today, however, a buzz of excitement hung in the air. Apparently, a renowned sculptor named Elias Thorne had chosen Elmwood to unveil his latest masterpiece. Elias Thorne was a local legend. He'd grown up in Elmwood before venturing out into the world and carving a name for himself in the art world. His return and his promise to donate a new sculpture to the museum had the entire village abuzz. The unveiling ceremony took place in the late afternoon sun. The villagers, all donned in their Sunday best, packed the square, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pride. A hush fell over the crowd as Elias, a tall, wiry man with a shock of white hair, strode towards a large sheet draped over a wooden platform in the center. With a flourish, he pulled the sheet away, revealing a breathtaking tableau. A series of life-size statues, carved from a pale, luminous stone, stood frozen in time. There was Old Man Henderson, his weathered face etched with a familiar gruffness. Young Sarah, the baker's daughter, with a playful glint in her eyes. Even Mrs. Peabody, the perpetually grumpy gossip, seemed to have been captured in a rare moment of amusement. The crowd gasped. The statues were incredible. Elias had captured not just their physical likenesses, but the very essence of each person. There was a twinkle in Old Man Henderson's eye, a mischievous glint in Sarah's, and a hint of a smile playing on Mrs. Peabody's lips, a sight so rare it bordered on mythical. I spent the next few hours engrossed in showing off the new exhibit to the awestruck villagers. Their reactions were heartwarming, a mixture of pride and amusement at seeing themselves immortalized in stone. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I finally closed the museum doors, a smile on my face. The next few days were a blur of greeting curious visitors and answering questions about Elias's masterpiece. People kept pointing out how lifelike the statues were, how they seemed to capture the very soul of their subjects. I agreed wholeheartedly. Elias Thorne was a genius. However, a small detail began to gnaw at me. Maybe it was because I spent so much time surrounded by them, but I could have sworn the statues seemed different. Not in a major way, mind you, but subtly so. A hint of an upward turn at the corners of their lips. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but there it was. A smile. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks. But as the days turned into weeks, the smiles became undeniable. They were subtle, certainly, but there was a definite upward curl to the corners of the stone lips. And something else about them, they seemed wider, more unsettling. The villagers, however, seemed oblivious. They continued to marvel at the statues, pointing out the smiles as evidence of Elias's extraordinary talent. He even captured Mrs. Peabody's rare smile. Someone would chuckle, but the smiles were unsettling me. There was something about them, something unnatural. And then, a disturbing realization hit me. The villagers, they seemed different too. A little paler, perhaps. A slight lack of the sparkle they used to have in their eyes. Was it just my paranoia? Or was there something, a connection between the statues and the villagers they depicted? The thought sent shivers down my spine. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every creak of the floorboards in the old museum, every rustle of wind against the window, sent me bolting upright, fear gnawing at my insides. The once serene smiles of the statues now seemed mocking, their stone eyes gleaming in the pale moonlight that filtered through the high windows. Desperate for answers, I started scouring the museum's dusty archives. Days turned into nights as I sifted through brittle newspapers and faded journals. Finally, a single dog-eared page tucked in the back of an old ledger caught my eye. It was a newspaper clipping dated from the early 1900s, its headline screaming, "Elmwood Tragedy, Sculptor's Curse Claims Lives." The article spoke of a young sculptor named Tobias Thorne, Elias's great-grandfather. He had unveiled a series of life-size statues in the village square, just as Elias had done. But within weeks, the villagers who had served as models began to fall ill. They grew pale and weak, their life seemingly draining away with each passing day. Tragically, they all died within a month of the sculpture's unveiling. The article ended abruptly, the cause of the mysterious deaths left unexplained. But the chilling connection was undeniable. The statues, the smiles, the illness, it was all happening again. Panic surged through me. I had to warn the villagers, but how could I convince them of a far-fetched curse based on a century-old newspaper clipping? They would think I was crazy. The next morning, I found Mrs. Peabody slumped over the counter at the bakery, her face pale and drawn. Sarah, her eyes dull and lifeless, stood beside her, a vacant expression on her face. They looked exactly like their stone counterparts, their smiles now grotesque caricatures. Terror choked me. I couldn't let this happen to everyone. Desperate, I raced back to the museum, the newspaper clipping clutched in my sweaty hand. I needed proof, something tangible. A plan, reckless and potentially disastrous, began to form in my mind. Elias Thorne, the sculptor, had to be the key. He had to know about the curse, the connection between the statues and the villagers. If I confronted him, maybe, just maybe, he'd know how to stop it. Grabbing a crowbar from the janitor's closet, I sprinted towards Elias's secluded cabin on the outskirts of the village. The setting sun cast long shadows, and the air crackled with an unsettling tension. As I reached the cabin door, a horrifying thought struck me. What if Elias wasn't the savior, but the source of the curse? What if he was intentionally draining the life force of the villagers to imbue his statues with some twisted sense of realism? The thought made me sick, but it was a possibility I couldn't ignore. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself and knocked on the weather-beaten door. A gruff voice called out from inside, and I steeled my nerves, the weight of the villagers' lives hanging heavy on my shoulders. The door creaked open, revealing a frail, white-haired man with piercing blue eyes. Elias Thorne? I croaked, my voice betraying my fear. He stared at me for a long moment, a flicker of recognition passing through his gaze. "Come in," he rasped, ushering me inside. The cabin was filled with unfinished sculptures, their blank faces staring accusingly. My heart pounded in my chest as I closed the door behind me. There was no turning back now. Elias's cabin smelled of damp stone and dust. He gestured for me to sit on a rickety wooden chair, his gaze fixed on the newspaper clipping I held tightly in my hand. My mind raced, formulating how to explain the situation without sounding like a raving lunatic. I found this in the museum archives, I stammered, pushing the clipping across the rough wooden table. "It seems there's a history regarding your family and the sculptures." Elias didn't touch the clipping. He just stared at it, his face etched with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Yes," he finally rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "The curse of the carver." Relief washed over me, mingled with a chilling sense of dread. Elias knew about the curse, but what did that mean? Was he willing to help break it? You can stop it, can't you?" I blurted out, the urgency of the situation fueling my boldness. "You know how." Elias sighed, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the cabin. "There is a way," he admitted, his eyes filled with a haunted look, "but it comes at a terrible cost." My grip tightened on the crowbar I had stashed under my jacket. Whatever the cost, it couldn't be worse than watching the villagers fade away like withered flowers. "Tell me," I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. Elias leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "The life force stolen by the statues can be returned," he explained, his voice a low murmur. "But only through a willing sacrifice. Someone must offer their own life force to sever the connection." My heart plummeted. Sacrifice? Who would be willing to give their life to save others? And even then, would it work? A sliver of doubt gnawed at my resolve. That's barbaric." I protested, a tremor in my voice. There had to be another way. Elias shook his head sadly. "There is not. The curse is bound to the bloodline. Only a descendant can break it." He fixed me with a piercing gaze. "You are young, with your whole life ahead of you. There may be another way to stop this, but we don't have the time to find it. The villagers are already fading." My mind churned, options dwindling faster than the villagers' life force. The responsibility felt overwhelming. Could I really ask someone to give their life? Could I even sacrifice myself, someone who had only just arrived in Elmwood? A flicker of movement outside the window caught my eye. Through the dusty glass, I saw Sarah, her vacant eyes staring blankly in our direction. A wave of nausea washed over me. I couldn't let her die, not like this. Taking a deep breath, I met Elias's gaze. "I'll do it," I declared, my voice surprisingly steady. "Tell me what I need to do." Elias stared at me, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. But then, a grim smile spread across his lips. He rose from his chair and began speaking in a low, guttural language that sent shivers down my spine. The air in the cabin crackled with an unseen energy as he traced symbols in the air with a gnarled finger. Panic welled up within me. Had I made a terrible mistake? But looking at the vacant stare of Sarah outside, I knew there was no turning back. I had to trust Elias, had to believe this horrifying ritual would actually work. As Elias finished his incantation, a faint blue light emanated from the newspaper clipping in my hand. The crowbar, still hidden under my jacket, felt like a lead weight. Would I have the courage to use it if things went south? Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The cabin walls spun, and the symbols Elias had drawn seemed to burn themselves into my vision. A choked cry escaped my lips as a searing pain ripped through my body, draining my energy with terrifying intensity. Through blurred vision, I saw Elias chanting furiously, his eyes blazing with an unnatural light. Then, a blinding flash filled the cabin, followed by a deafening silence. When my vision cleared, I found myself slumped in the chair, gasping for breath. Elias stood before me, his face pale and drawn, but the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a profound sadness. He gestured towards the window. Tentatively, I rose and stumbled towards it. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the village square.